I think the high performance culture is overall very important in this space because it's a role or a job, a mission that it keeps you on top of your toes. I'm always feeling a bit of anxiety when tests are running and oh my god, what's gonna be? Your audience might know me from industry events such as the Business of Apps conference in Berlin or the App Growth Summit or the Growth Festival organized by Feature. And they could also know me from LinkedIn. I talk there about product growth, about leadership for women, and about agentic AI. In the past decade, I switched between industries. I worked in the automotive industry, in the premium industry, and in the tech one. But at Montblanc specifically, we had more than doubled the revenue from that program alone. So we were testing lifecycle communication against typical communication that customers would receive, which would be standalone campaigns, either related to product launches or to seasonal campaigns. So having that lifecycle communication that was very much data-driven, because we first studied the personas and we mapped what is the probability for them to buy a next product and what type of product, that really lifted the revenue and had a very positive result.
So it was like one-off messages about, hey, we have this new, or we have this product, or we have this discount, versus almost personalized messaging about what would fit the customer.
So it was a lot of cross-selling, upselling opportunities involved in the life cycles. Obviously, as a luxury brand, we were not doing discounting, not that much, and really very seldom.
Do you have like a kind of a recipe for us when you start at a new brand? What do you always do when you come in order to set up an experimentation program?
I usually have like 5 steps that I go through, but I would say before doing those 5 steps, I have a step 0, which is of course.
Ioana, you have worked for great companies like Kia, Montblanc, Black Lane, and your last role or your current role is at Blinkist as product growth consultant and CRO manager. It's, as I would explain it, an app that summarizes books. And what does the experimentation program look like there? How many tests, for example, do you guys run a month?
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to the initial podcast. It's really a pleasure to be here. About the experimentation program at Blinkist, I have been running experiments up to 4 experiments per platform, meaning for Android, iOS, and web in the past few months. It depends really on the hypothesis itself, how much the minimum detectable effect is expected, and it also depends on the time needed for a test to conclude. We usually leave a test run for, we call it a business cycle. So that is, for example, can be a minimum of 7 days.
So, Ioana, imagine we have never met. Where could our listeners know you from? And what's the specific thing that you're exceptionally good at in the growth product experimentation space?
Yeah, so your audience might know me from industry events such as the Business of Apps conference in Berlin or the App Growth Summit or the Growth Festival organized by Feature. And they could also know me from LinkedIn. I talk there about product growth, about leadership for women, and about agentic AI. Or they could know me from podcasts such as yours, or from communities such as the Women in Experimentation community that you have co-founded. I also worked across industries, so your audience might also know me from my network. In the past decade, I switched between industries. I worked in the automotive industry, in the premium industry, and in the tech one. So there are many chances that we have met across those roles.
So how did you end up in this whole product and experimentation space in the first place? Where did you actually start? Did you study something similar, for example, or did you really just have had your first job in the space already? What did that look like?
Well, I did study. I did a Master of Science in Marketing, which is very much related to what I'm doing today, actually, in experimentation. And I started my career very early while I was studying my bachelor's, and there I had a role in a small PR agency. I was the PR manager there, and I also worked in the media industry for a short time. So I did very traditional, I would say, marketing at the beginning, very, very long time ago. And then I switched to corporate identity, for example. So at Kia, one of my first roles were actually in branding and corporate identity. And then I switched to product there, and I was in charge of launching the Kia Customers Platform, which was the single point of interaction between the brand and their customers. And the main purpose there was to engage customers and stay in touch and keep them loyal, right? Loyalty meaning not only product loyalty, but also service loyalty in that context. So this is where I really had a very, very steep learning curve, because I was in charge of developing both the website and the app, and I had to launch it across markets. So a lot of rollout and go-to-market strategy. And then I switched to CRM. At Montblanc specifically, I was very much into that, and there I helped launch the first lifecycle program for the brand, which was afterwards expanded to a group level, to a Richemont group level. And then I switched to Black Lane, where I was heading retention. And that was a much broader scope. And finally, I moved in again back to product, and I'm currently very much focused on CRO from the product and marketing side.
And you told us a little bit about your time at Kia. Did you already see or run your first experiment there, or was that later on in your career that you ran your first experiment?
We did run experiments, but at Kia specifically, it was a lot about building. So it was really a lot about go-to-market and building itself. The big first experiment that I have done was at Montblanc, I would say. Although, of course, I've done one of the big experiments I've done also during my... But at Montblanc specifically, what we've done was running the lifecycle program that I've mentioned. And there, for me, was really extraordinary to see a significant uplift of that program. We had more than doubled the revenue from that program alone. So we were testing lifecycle communication against typical communication that customers would receive, which would be standalone campaigns, either related to product launches or to seasonal campaigns. So having that lifecycle communication that was very much data-driven, because we first studied the personas and we mapped what is the probability for them to buy a next product and what type of product, that really lifted the revenue and had a very positive result.
So it was like one-off messages about, hey, we have this new, or we have this product, or we have this discount, versus almost personalized messaging about what would fit the customer.
Exactly. So it was a lot of cross-selling, upselling opportunities involved in the life cycles. Obviously, as a luxury brand, we were not doing discounting.
Right.
Not that much, and really very seldom. And so it was a lot about engaging without the lever of discounting, which is always very interesting.
The first, was that already an A/B test, or?
Yes.
That was, okay. Well, then that counts as your first A/B test, right?
The first huge impact.
Yeah. Okay, because before that there were A/B tests without impact, or?
Well, no, but they were smaller. So also during my studies, for example, the master thesis that I had was an A/B test in itself. I was A/B testing the country of manufacture effect on the perception of a brand. So I was back then working at Kia, and the master thesis was done with them, in collaboration with them. It's very typical that there are very in-depth user interviews used before a car is launched, for example. And we used those insights and then made a quantitative research out of it to study the effect of country of manufacture, so made in Korea versus made in Europe. And back then, we did find a significant effect of being made in Europe having a more positive perception than being made in Korea. Things for sure changed meanwhile, but it was a great first experiment that I've run.
Of course, you have worked at multiple brands. Do you have like a kind of a recipe for us when you start at a new brand, what do you always do when you come in order to set up an experimentation program? Or does that really depend on the brand that you're going to be working with?
I usually have like 5 steps that I go through, but I would say before doing those 5 steps, I have a step 0, which is of course talking to the stakeholders. It's very important for me because this gives me the direction for what follows in terms of the methodology that I apply.
But it's probably not just talking to stakeholders. What are you looking for? What are the questions you ask?
Yes, I do have a list of questions, part of my, so to say, onboarding, where I ask what are the key metrics that drives them? What did they see working in the past? What are the main priorities, the growth levers they believe in, and so on and so forth. There are many, many questions that I include there. And that gives me the direction. And afterwards, what I usually do is to do a deep dive. I really like to look at the core metrics that define growth for that company. But I also like to, of course, understand the audiences and understand the growth loops that the company currently wins from, and the performance of those. And then the next step is to identify the main problem or the main problems. The third step is to define hypotheses for that problem. A set of hypotheses, usually there is not a single hypothesis that answers a problem. You could see a problem in a metric like conversion rate for a specific step of the funnel, right? And then you would tackle that. Obviously, there is no one single answer that gives you the solution. That's why I usually define a set of hypotheses to solve that problem. And then I go into implementation and prioritization and then implementation of the roadmap.
Okay. I'm just writing along here, but I think I got your framework. So it's step 0, talk to stakeholders, see what they want, key metrics, what worked in the past, find growth levers and their goals. And then it's doing the deep dive. That's step 1, right? In the data.
Exactly.
Step 2 is identifying the problems based on the data. Then step 3 is coming up with hypotheses and also a set of hypotheses for prioritization, and then implementing a roadmap.
I would say then prioritize them and then move forward with the implementation of the roadmap.
And do all the steps take the same amount of time? Is like, for example, the data deep dive, does that take more time than, for example, let's say, putting the hypotheses together?
It really depends on how good the data is tracked and how easily accessible it is and how much support you have from a data analyst, for example, in that exercise. And for the hypothesis generation, it can also take longer, but it is linked to the quality of the data analysis done before, because it can inspire very well the hypothesis generation process. I lately also like to use AI for that. So I think this can speed up the process.
Yeah.
And I am currently working on building a hypothesis generator that looks into internal data, past test results, and patterns of behavior, but also looks at the industry, at the latest research, so the external competitors and so on and so forth, and then suggest hypotheses as well. So it can be a helpful hand in the whole exercise, because typically you would do that manually, and of course that takes a while.
How do you actually build that? A hypothesis generator that also connects your previous research and tests and
there are couple of things that need to be done. The knowledge base needs to be in place, then clear instructions for the agent, and then depending on the platform favored by the client, it can be built in several options. So yeah, it's a mix of knowledge and instructions that help an agent perform well.
So this is something you have been using for Blinkist?
I am currently building that. What I have been using for Blinkist is a experiment analyzer that helps give direction with statistical robustness for the experiments we are running. And the next step is to build more agents to enable the CRO team.
And what does that analysis tool do? Does it just say it's a win, yes or no? Or does it also recommend next steps? What does that?
It does more than that. It basically looks at the results and recommends not only, it doesn't say only it's a win or not, but it also recommends, should you scale up a test, should you scale down, should you stop because there is a harm detected, or if you scale, what should you take into account, what observational metrics you should cut. And when the test concludes, then it does give recommendations on what should be studied next, what should be observed longer term, and all that knowledge is captured and afterwards used by the agents that I've mentioned for the internal data analysis.
Okay, and where is that information stored? Is that also in the end, does it feed back to a program like Airtable or Monday or something else?
It feeds into the knowledge base. So we have a single point of truth, so to say, where all the results are captured on each test, and then the internal data analyst would read that.
Okay, and is that a specific software or tool?
It's in the ticketing system. Everything is in the ticketing system.
Got it.
Yeah, it's as simple as it can be.
I see. And just going back to experiments, can you maybe run us through an experiment that you've recently run, something that you are able to share?
I would say one experiment that I ran and surprised me personally, because I really believed in it, was a hypothesis where we said that we believe if we show the value proposition, if we let users experience the value proposition within the onboarding before showing the paywall, right? This would improve conversion.
So this is Blinkist and then already giving people a summary or something.
Exactly. So during the onboarding, you are able to listen to not to the whole summary, but a fragment of it. And we tested this, and actually the result was not positive. And for me, it was a surprising finding, because it's a kind of a general knowledge that you should do that, and
Yeah.
it has many chances to succeed, right? But it was not really the case, which has, in my view, two explanations. One is that it maybe introduces too much friction in the onboarding, where for our audience, for that specific audience, it's not really adding value, or the implementation needs to change. So there needs to be another design, another approach to it. So yeah, that's one example that was surprising.
And have you seen any mistakes in experimentation programs, or maybe mistakes you made yourself that you would like to share that we can learn from as well?
There are a couple of mistakes, let's put it this way, that can be made in experimentation. A very, very popular one is to misinterpret the results and to take decisions that are actually quite risky. So false positives, false negatives are one of the highest risks, because they impact the revenue, right? Either in a lost opportunity or in a direct negative impact for a false positive. So I think this is one of the mistakes, and this is why I've built that agent, the experiment analyzer, in order to really introduce more statistical robustness in the whole process. Yes, so that it did happen to me to be too ecstatic about results that looked so positive, but without looking at the whole picture.
So what did you change now then in the maybe the thresholds, etc.?
Yeah, exactly. So what I've done was to work with the O'Brien Fleming's framework, which basically allows for more variance at the beginning when you have a smaller sample size, and then it becomes more strict when the sample size increases. So, for example, at the beginning of a test, if you have a plus 30% difference for the test group, it will not tell you, yeah, roll it out. It will tell you, yeah, okay, positive, but you still have to, this is normal at the beginning, please run the experiment for much longer. And the more the sample size increases, the faster the significance can be reached.
And does that also help within the organization, or is it just you looking at that message like, hey, wait, don't immediately implement it, or is it also for other people?
I think it's a matter of credibility of the CRO function in itself. So yes, it does help. I mean, first of all, it protects against losses, right? But it also brings credibility to the experimentation program. And that is absolutely important for the allowance to experiment and the risk, the taste for taking risks.
Because did this come from an experiment or an experience where you have maybe rolled out something that was actually harmful?
No, but we did see examples of tests that we were really, really enthusiastic about. And then the second day, they were like really brutally down. And we were like, what's going on? And then investigations follow and so on and so forth, which can be saved. And I think mistakes can happen, of course. It's part of the game. But if you could minimize them, then it's highly advisable because that's a costly one.
Yeah.
Could be a costly one. In general, I also think it's good to retest things that have worked in the past, also as a measure to minimize and to also look at the overall business metrics, how they are performing in the time tests are being run.
Yeah. Yeah.
It cannot explain everything, but just to have as an observational.
And have you seen like this panic about data in the first day or the second day in all the brands you worked at, or is it just specific to one brand?
No, I think it's very human. I mean, it's a bias, right? When you believe in an idea, it's of course it's very difficult to put the ego down and really go to proofs only and to be very cold about it. So I think it's very human to believe in it. I also do it, so it's fine. I'm aware of it. That's very important to be aware of it. So I don't think it's a brand specific. I don't know if you agree with me or not, because you also have a lot of experience in the space.
I mean, I would say it is definitely everywhere, but some brands are definitely more receptive to it, to peaking, as we call it, right? So they peak the results. We already know there's never going to be enough data to declare anything. But yeah, depending on the culture of the teams and how good they are with data, some really understand like, okay, in the first 2 days, first week, we don't look at the data, but other brands might totally freak out. And it really depends on the brand.
I would look at the data even in the first and in the first. So I personally look at the data in the first day or immediately after the first day, because there can be bugs that can happen. And then if you have according to the framework, if you have a really huge difference, then it will flag it as a problem.
Agreed. Yeah.
Right. So I would run from my experience, because I learned from it. I would still look, and I also start tests with a lower allocation. So I typically nowadays start with lower allocations just to manage risk, and then I increase allocation if the results are consistently well.
But doesn't that just mean that you're kind of prolonging?
Yes, you are prolonging, but there is a risk.
Yeah, I know that's true. And did you ever need to convince higher management of resources for experimentation? And if so, how have you convinced them to, I don't know, maybe put more effort or resources into experimentation?
Yes, I had to. To answer your first question, I had to convince them. And I think by experimenting in itself, you prove if more resources should be allocated for it, in the sense that I think the work needs to be done for people to actually be receptive. Experimentation can bring significant revenue uplifts. Once you prove that this is the case, then I think it's almost impossible not for people not to listen. The thing is that you need to make it super easy to understand, right? So I would typically not explain to someone with statistical terms if an experiment is worth rolling out or anything like that. But I think starting small and showing that experimentation can bring those small wins, and then coming up with ideas on what you could experiment next. So basically selling.
And how, now that we're talking about success, what does success in a growth or experimentation program look like to you?
So for me, it's revenue per user. I usually look at revenue per user in order to account also per user, meaning per user that enters the test. So to account for both revenue and conversion rate and time to learn. I think it's also very, very important. So I'm very picky on that because one of my first thoughts when I want to experiment something is how can I test this idea in the fastest way possible or with the minimum effort. So it's really thinking about what's the MVP of this idea that I could test and gain that confidence level that would allow me to invest more devs work, for example, in it.
And how do you measure time to learn? So is it from the moment that you have a hypothesis in your ticketing system to when?
To implement the test, basically.
To implement the test. Okay.
So basically, I'm looking at the effort.
Yeah. Is that also something you communicate back to the organization? Like, hey, we have decreased our time to learn in general this quarter, or is that more something just for you to look at and to keep track of?
It's more for me and the devs teams. So instead of saying, okay, we want to test this hypothesis, we need to develop this many features, I'm like, what can we do with what we have in place to just confirm that this idea has potential? And then we can make it beautiful and improve it.
And so we talked about your 5 steps framework to building a program, but do you also do kind of extracurricular things to build a culture or maybe to get people more aware of experimentation?
What I've seen works very well to motivate the teams to work and be integrated in the process. Let's put it this way. Brainstormings. So for example, what I like doing is when I come up with the hypothesis, I might, of course, have a list of hypotheses from my experience, from my research, but I really want always to have everyone involved in the team. So I typically run brainstormings with the engineers, with the QA person, because they are interacting with the product all the time, right? So there are always very good ideas coming from them as well. And of course, that is one step. And the other is to estimate the effort. So after we come up with the hypothesis and part of the prioritization process, I gather again with engineers and we go through what development is actually needed to fulfill those or to implement those hypotheses. And then we discuss technical solutions. And then the question of time to learn comes in comes in the game. And this is where the discussion takes place.
Yeah, and I think from what it sounds like, you work very close with engineers.
Yes, I worked very closely with engineers on this. Yeah. And also, I think the high performance culture is overall very important in this space because it's a role or a job, a mission that it keeps you on top of your toes. I don't know if you agree with me, but I'm always feeling a bit of anxiety when tests are running and, oh my God, what's going to be?
Do you call teams that experiment high-performing teams then?
No, I think you need a high-performing culture in running the show, in experimentation, but overall growth, I would say.
Because it's like there's so much uncertainty in it?
Because the pacing is fast and because, yes, you have this level of anxiety that is...
You kind of need to stomach it, right?
You need to stomach it and you need to maintain then a balance between those moments of anxiety, so to say, and then match it with moments of more calm.
So we've spoken a lot about the product world, growth, experimentation, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about your new adventure, which is building the She Leads Accelerator. And from what I understand, it's helping women in leadership. But maybe you can explain a little bit more about what it is that you're doing there.
I am building this program for women that are new managers. So they receive the position of a new manager or they are aspiring to be new managers in the next few months. And the goal here is to prepare women for what is expected from a leadership position, what it means to lead people, how is basically the shift from being an individual contributor to a people manager. and help manage themselves in this process as well and their energy.
And how is being a leader different for women specifically?
Being a woman in exactly this stage proved to me that has its own challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Why I'm saying that is because there is a tendency for women to be very hard on themselves, to self-criticize themselves. And of course, if you are put in a position where there are expectations, but nobody really explained you how things should be done or what those expectations are precisely, then when you are encountering challenges and obstacles, as a woman tend to believe that it's my problem and I'm not good enough and maybe I'm not cut out for it, or this kind of very negative self-thoughts. And that's why I really believe it's important to be aware of the skills, but also of the challenges that come with such a role, and not fall into this spiraling effect that can only be detrimental for any person, but in this instance, women.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're kind of addressing imposter syndrome, which is also something we talk about in the community of women in experimentation a lot. But it also sounds like you're coming from your own experience and you want to help women in the same position, or at least make it easier for them. Because it sounds like you base this off of your own experiences. Was it difficult for you to step into leadership?
Yeah, of course, I did struggle. So first of all, as an aspiring leader, it's a question of how exactly do you position yourself for the position you want? Because typically you need to behave for the position you want already in order to get it. So, and you don't receive training on this, because typically leadership training is offered for people that already lead and lead big teams, because the cost is divided by the team but the number of persons that benefit from it. So it can get actually quite long until you get any training whatsoever. So in my instance, I did struggle when having my first new manager role as well, because I didn't know really what's expected and how to make that shift from really doing the job to actually motivating and coordinating a team to do the job while I am giving the guidance and can coach them to to fulfill that strategy.
Is it a course? Is it a cohort? How does it work?
It's going to be a self-paced program combined with group mentorship that is going to be done by me with curated guests. And it's also going to have the community element, in which I believe very much. I really believe the peer coaching in itself can be transformative. I've done it in the past and I saw the benefits of it. So this will be a combination of these three elements: self-paced learning, the group mentorship, and the peer coaching.
So the content of the help that you're offering, is that focusing on getting into a leadership position or for when you already have one?
It's focused on getting the clarity for why you want something and getting the confidence of being there, and also getting the resilience in terms of managing difficult situations, managing overwhelm, managing stress, because you cannot just erase them or eliminate them. You need to learn how to deal with stress and how to manage it. But very important is to talk about those difficult situations, how to deal with difficult people, how to negotiate, how to set up boundaries, and so on. So all these are elements that are part of the core program.
Well, I'm thinking I might join because it sounds very helpful.
It is indeed.
If other people also want to join, where do they need to go?
So I'm going to launch the next cohort in June, and I'm going to announce everything on LinkedIn in my profile. So if your audience is interested in it, I recommend them to get in touch with me on LinkedIn, and they will be announced as soon as the process starts.
Okay, what I will do is I'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the description so people can just go ahead and follow you. And for our conversation right now, Ioana, I would like to thank you for sharing all your knowledge about, well, from all the different brands and all the experiments. And thanks so much for sharing this.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been great talking to you.